Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Bavarian and today I would like to take another look at Imperator and explain how a few of its systems interact with one another and how you can influence the future of your realm for the better. In the last video, the first tutorial on this topic, we went over everything that you need to consider when starting out with your nation and talked about the interconnectivity that exists between the three main layers of the game, that is characters, population and the state. Today's video will see us continue this explanatory playthrough with Carthage by going through our chosen focus tree, the Aegis of Africa, and in doing so taking a look at cities, settlements, their inhabitants, and general management of foreign populations. Just as a reminder, first and foremost, I want you to treat Imperator as a roleplay civilization builder. The future of an entire civilization is in your hands, and while you can simply go for the biggest modifiers, the game gives you a lot of leeway to play suboptimally in a roleplay fashion and still find grand success. I will also tell you that there are many more cogs in this system that is your population, as it is the centerpiece of this entire game. So, what are we going to do first with this Carthaginian playthrough? We already committed to provoking a war with the Berber nation of Massylia via the mutiny of the Berbers focus. We can also take a look at the other parts of this focus tree to see whether we can already work towards some of those. The tale of the four cities is incredibly simple. All we need to do is annex 4 of our coastal vassals, and we will simply have to meet the requirements that allow us annexation. In this case, their opinion of us needs to be above 190. Simply improve their opinion, annex them, and the focus is done. Easy. Integrate the Musulamia requires us to have a city in one of these 3 provinces that you can see named right here to show these tribal barbarians, my apologies, I of course mean friends, that there is a future with much larger prosperity waiting for them. Now, the question here is, how do you found a city, why do you want to found a city, and what does it all mean? Let's talk about basic population management. Inside of your realm, there are generally speaking 3 layers of areas. Regions are the largest areas, and each region has one governor. Each region on the map has several provinces, and each province has its own governor policy, even under the same governor. Each province also has its own level of loyalty, its own amount of trade routes, and its own food storage. Each province is made up of individual territories in which the actual population lives. Any territory that is settled on the map is one of 3 things: a settlement, a city, or a metropolis. You can transform a territory into any of the other types via the decisions in the respective territory's interface. The biggest difference between settlements and the 2 other types are 4 different aspects. Number 1. Settlements have, generally speaking, a lower population capacity as well as a lower civilization level. Of course, it does make a lot of sense. The civilization level of a territory is a measurement of its infrastructure, and there will of course be better infrastructure in a city, so both of these tend to be higher either directly or with the help of buildings. Number 2. Settlements are the only type that can produce food products of the types of grain, fish, livestock and vegetables. If we were to build a city in the territory of Tabraka, we would lose the grain trade good and instead gain a random one. If you take away a territory's food production, you could possibly be emptying the entire food storage of the province that territory is in and cause starvation, unless you or your governor were to import food by trading for it, or another territory is producing more food. Number 3. Settlements have significantly fewer buildings that can be built. Not only is a settlement's building selection coming with its very own effects, you can also only ever have 1 building in one settlement. Cities and metropolises gain 1 building slot for every 10 pops in them. This way, a city can grow much larger than settlements ever could. And last but not least, number 4. Different pops are happier and more desired in different territory types. So let's take a look at what the individual pop types even are. After that, we will connect settlements, cities and metropolises to see in what ways they influence one another. Before we jump into the different pop types, let's mention one thing. All of them have different things that impact their happiness, like culture, religion, and so on, but all of them are equally impacted by your stability being above or below 50. Stability underneath 50 lowers their happiness by each point of stability you are below it, and stability above 50 has the reverse effect. Now, take note that, as always, I want you to understand how these things work, rather than simply memorize the math. So let's take a look. First, there are nobles. Nobles are the creme de la creme of your society. Each of their pops brings in a large amount of research points and also contributes to the amount of trade routes in a province to a large degree. They are only to be found in cities, metropolises, and your capital. Generally, seeing as they only expect the best of the best, they can very quickly become unhappy should you be unable to provide food, a high civilization level, or otherwise fail to respect their privileges with laws or by giving rights to too many other cultures. Next up, citizens are quite similar to nobles, and you can look at them as nouveau riche people that really want to be treated as nobles but are generally ignored by the old nobility. They generate a decent amount of research points, generate trade routes at least a bit, and even give you a small amount of manpower. They too rely heavily on the civilization level of the territory that they live in for happiness, and can quickly become unhappy if their demands are not met, but have a higher base level of happiness so that they won't be displeased as quickly as the nobles. Since they aren't quite as angry about living in a place that only has dirt streets, they can even be found in settlements, albeit in very small numbers. Here's something that usually confuses people, but is actually quite simple. Since only nobles and citizens generate research points, they are very important for our research progress, which you can see when looking at research efficiency. Now, what actually is this research efficiency? To progress into new technologies at a speed that the game wants you to be moving at, your efficiency needs to be at 100%. Your efficiency basically simply compares the total amount of research points created by your nobles and citizens, and then compares that to the total population that you have and that belongs to the integrated culture. So, since we didn't integrate anybody else yet, Carthage measures your research points only against Punic pops. If your efficiency is above 100%, this is a sign that your nobles and citizens are more than happy and you will gain tax faster than the game thinks should be normal. If it is underneath 100%, your nobles and citizens are unhappy, therefore produce a less than optimal amount of points and you will fall behind in tech. Meaning that you need to take actions to make citizens and nobles happier. You can do this with laws, government forms, local buildings, more stability, cultural rights, etc, etc. If your research efficiency is as high as it can currently get, then you simply don't need to worry about citizens or nobles for the moment. And that is really all you need to know about research efficiency right now. Now next up are freemen. Freemen are the artisans and plebs of your nation. They're doing quite alright for themselves, but certainly aren't as wealthy or arrogant as nobles and citizens. They provide a small amount of money in taxes and are your main supply of manpower. While they too rely on the civilization level to be happy, they are generally quite easygoing and can be pleased much more easily. While they enjoy living in cities, they also additionally are common in settlements. And second to last are tribesmen. They provide more taxes than freemen and a slightly smaller amount of manpower, but as a civilized nation, you are rather unlikely to actually see that money and those men. Tribesmen effectively work in reverse. They hate good infrastructure and with that hate a good civilization level. The higher the civilization level is in their territory, the angrier they will be. As a civilized nation, what you primarily want to keep in mind is that tribesmen of foreign cultures can very quickly become a source of much unrest, but more on that in a bit once we deal with the Berbers. And then last but very much not least are the slaves. Slaves produce the bulk of your tax income, and different from all other pop groups, their happiness simply does not matter for their actual production rate. After all, they are slaves, they have to work no matter what. The most important point here is that besides the taxes, they also generate trade goods. By default, without any other modifiers of buildings or state policies applied, every 15 slaves in a settlement and every 20 slaves in a city will generate one extra unit of whatever trade good this territory is producing. This means that, for example, creating slave hubs in locations with excellent resources can create more of those resources that you can then either import to regions within your own empire or simply sell them to other empires, making a lot of money. Now that we know about all of the pop types, what makes them happy, what they produce, and where they like to live, let's add another dynamic. All of these pop types have something called political weight. The higher they are listed here, the higher is their political weight. The higher their political weight, the more does their unhappiness matter for unrest. If a pop drops below 50% in happiness, they will start producing unrest. The more unrest the territories in one province have, the more will they impact province loyalty. Should province loyalty drop to 0, the province will then rebel against you and a costly local war will lead to the death of many pops. You are very likely to win that war, but still, at what cost? Now, of course, we want to avoid that, and for that we would have to have pops that are happy or, as mentioned before, have such a small amount of political weight that their unhappiness does not lead a province down into rebellion. Now, let's connect the knowledge about pops to the territory types that we talked about earlier, and to this Carthage campaign as we know it. In this video, I will be skipping over the actual war against the Berbers because, in all earnest, I could literally not raise my troops and would still win. Carthage starts off with a myriad of vassals that will be swarming the enemy. We will be talking about all sorts of warfare in a later video when we face Rome, so don't worry too much about that yet. Anyway, let's continue. I pieced out Massilia and Massaesylia, the latter allied the former when the Focus Trees War started, so I got to eat both of them immediately. If Massaesylia does not ally Massilia, you may have to justify a war manually. Now, what do we do with these newly gained territories? For the sake of showcasing populations, I will be treating the populations of the newly conquered nations entirely differently. Here's where all the theory we talked about earlier is about to come together. Picture this, you are a Berber, and Carthage just crushed your tribal leadership, maybe even executed all of your tribal leaders, and all of a sudden states that you no longer have any citizenship rights. Hell, while Carthage allows you to be a freeman, you would much rather be a tribesman, but Carthage simply does not like tribesmen, and in fact never wants them to have in their territory. Wouldn't that make you angry? This is the anger that we will be working with and against. When it comes down to it, we essentially annex two big cultures, Massylians and Massaesylians. If they were in our culture group, we are Punic, so they would have to be Levantine, they would not be all that unhappy, and on top of that, they will also simply assimilate into our culture more easily. Think about it, they already speak a language close to ours, and they praise gods that are also very, very close to our own. But their language in this case, their ways, and their religion are totally different from others. So obviously, we are a foreign invader, a conqueror, and we are unfair to them. They are very much not happy, and, you know, it makes sense. Let's talk about these two cultures individually. The Massylians on one hand are somewhat our allies. Yes, we did just defeat Massylia, but at the same time we have a sizable Massylian minority in our realm already, and the Musulamii have been nothing if not loyal to us, so we should reward them. This is more roleplay than anything, and of course, because I want to show this off. First, we will be granting them additional rights. Mind you, if you set them to citizens or nobles immediately, an integration process will begin that will likely upset your already integrated cultures, and once it is finished, will leave you with a whole bunch of new pops that are mostly tribal because, well, their society until now was tribal. This means they will drag down your research ratio as well. We don't want that at all, of course. So instead I will grant them the right of inheritance. This is a minor culture right rather than a big step into citizenship. It will make our Punic pops slightly unhappy, but only for 3 years, but in return, the Massylians will be happier permanently, and should we integrate them in the future, that process will take less time and will be less likely to upset our Punic pops greatly. I will even go so far as to give them a governor of their own culture and religion, and with that, give them relative autonomy from Carthaginian cultural intrusion. Now, initially, with their population mostly being tribal, they will, despite all these steps, still be unhappy. Unrest will be generated and the newly conquered regions will lose loyalty, no doubt. It is, after all, still a massive change. However, as time goes on, since we are civilized, the newly conquered territories will gain civilization. Their tribal pops will either become slaves or freemen, both of which like civilization, and I will be founding cities in key areas, further making the lands more civilized. Once I've granted them a good amount of rights, once they have become more civilized, I will grant them the right of citizenship. At that point, they won't take away much of our research efficiency, as many of their pops will then quickly transition into citizen pops, and we will be all the richer, for their wisdom has been added to the Carthaginian Republic. This is the way of reaching out to them and saying you can become equal citizens, but it will take some time, for we need to build up your regions first. The Massaesylians, on the other hand, awaits a rather different fate. They willfully resisted me in their entirety and shall now wear this shame as a crown of thorns. We will know nothing but an iron fist for them. So, how does that work? We're getting rid of the unrest of the Massylians by giving them rights and civilizing them. The alternative goes something like this. First, we'll found a colony in their lands, telling them that they are nothing to us and that only Punic citizens matter. This colony will serve as our own center of civilization in the west of North Africa and should be made into a city as soon as possible, or alternatively already be founded in a city. Sadly, you cannot influence where this colony will actually be founded, so, if you don't get it into a city province already, then simply found one right after. Since the newly arrived colonizing Punic pops are happy, they will indirectly counteract the unhappiness of the Berbers in this single province. Essentially, if a pop is unhappy, their unhappiness only generates as much unrest as they are part of the total population of the province. Meaning that if we have a happy population in the province as well, the unrest of the unhappy population will mean less. Now, do you remember when I talked about political weight? This plays a massive role right here. I will be rejecting the right of Massaesylians to become even freemen. Nothing but slavery is good enough for them. They will be rather unhappy about this, of course. This is why I will manually change the governor policy to harsh treatment as well. Not only does this policy suppress provincial disloyalty on its own, it additionally demotes pops significantly faster. And that is what we desire after all. We want them to stop being tribesmen and start being slaves. The more of them are slaves, the less does their unhappiness matter, as their political weight is basically nothing, and in one generation, most of the Massaesylians will be slaves. It is an uneasy and incredibly harsh peace that we establish, as they surely hate us, but they simply do not possess the means to resist. Any way for Massaesylians to become citizens will be via assimilation, slowly but surely converting them to our faith and culture. Their ways, however, will never be accepted in this republic. This is the way of suppression. Here, similar to the way of integration, you will initially see a slow drop in province loyalty due to unrest for a number of years, possibly even decades. But in most cases, it will never go down to zero, as at some point the suppression policy results in them being political lightweights, in comparison to that policy itself, your Punic settlers, and their own assimilation. At that point, the region has been thoroughly pacified, in this case with fire and steel, rather than with an open hand. Now I want to encourage you to experiment with both of these ways, maybe, oftentimes even find a middle way. Building buildings in settlements, and of course also in cities, will make it so that pops will be happier regardless of whether you are totally suppressing them, going the middle way, or properly integrating them. Simply make sure that you find what you think your civilization and your character currently in power would do, and then do it. Even if you were to face a rebellion, isn't that a great story? Your reaction, the reaction of the general that leads and suppresses this rebellion, is an absolutely great story that will continue to form your civilization as you go. So a suboptimal outcome can oftentimes be the optimal outcome for storytelling. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you still have questions, then make sure to leave a like and a comment, and I will help you as much as I can in the comments or in a future video. The next video of this series is most likely going to be about tribes, because that is something that I have seen requested quite a lot. With that being said, I would like to thank the members of the channel that are making videos such as this one possible. Thank you all so much for supporting this channel directly, dear barons, dear counts, and dear absolutely gorgeous dukes. And for now, later, alligator.